Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's Susan Coffin for Attitude Magazine. We have as a guest today Dr. Theresa Maitland, who is the coordinator of academic success for students with LD and ADHD at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She is the author of two wonderful books with Dr. Patricia Quinn, who has also been a webinar participant in the past, which I highly recommend. They're on the subject of transition to college. One is called Ready for Takeoff, and the other one is called On Your Own, a college readiness guide for teens with ADHD and LD. Dr. Maitland's going to talk today about preparing teens with ADHD, LD for success in life. That topic sounds broad. We've been thinking of it as primarily about the preparation for and the transition to college, but she's also open to some questions on broader issues of preparing for success in life. So thank you for joining us. And with that, let me turn it over to Dr. Maitland. Thank you for being here.
So some of the first things we're going to talk about can be hard to hear, but they are sort of facts that we have to grapple with as parents and professionals working with this population. So in today's world, it's important to know that not all college students who enter college graduate. And I'm sure many of you in the audience have sent young people off to college, and hopefully you've experienced many of them succeeding, but college transition is hard for everybody. And what the research is telling us is that it can be especially unnerving for individuals with ADHD and LD, more than for their peers who don't have these issues. And that's primarily because there are huge differences between high school and four-year colleges where people may be living on their own. This may be different. The differences may be less extreme depending on the size of the college that the person chooses, whether it's public or private, but pretty much across all types of four-year colleges, the transition is made difficult because of the differences. And let's just talk a little bit on this slide about some of the differences. We always think of the academic differences that exist between high school and college. And let me just say, every fall in my office, I hear the students I work with say, I wish I would have understood before coming here how different it was going to be. Many times they'll say, I knew it was going to be harder, but I'm good at harder. I just didn't think it would be this different. So, some of the major differences I'll just mention, and we can talk based on your questions. Classes don't meet every day. They meet less regularly than they do in high school. Because of that, a lot of onus is put on the student to do a lot of the learning outside of class. And classes are more an opportunity to present knowledge, but then the student's expected to go master it and integrate it. Depending on the college, as we said before, the classes may be much larger than high school. If you're in today's world, many people are sending their young person to a state college because of the economy. And in most state colleges with budget cuts, classes are larger. They're lecture-based versus discussion-based. And those require very different learning skills. Because the college professors are experts in their field and not necessarily operating a classroom like high school teachers do, what happens is there are fewer tests and assignments that are used to grade a student. So it's not unusual for students to have 2 tests the whole semester. So with that in mind, and we can go to the next slide, first of all, as we said, there's this huge difference in academic expectations and how learning is organized. But then what very few people really talk a lot about is how different the living situation is. And that can really blindside all students, but especially students with the kind of executive functioning problems that students with ADHD and LD have. What I have on this slide is a quote from one of my favorite students. When he was talking about how hard it was to adjust to college life with no adult and total freedom, is this quote, which is pretty much captures it. Being in college is like being a kid in a candy store, but the owner has taken a permanent vacation. That actually came out of the mouths of one of my students. However, then in the next breath, what he said is, even though I hated how my parents used to nag me, now I realize I don't know how to nag myself. And that kind of captures the major life issues that a person has to instantly learn how to cope with. daily living skills, learning how to wake themselves up, send themselves to bed, and know how much sleep they really need. Every fall I do a coaching group for first-year students with ADHD and LD as they transition. And recently, sleep was the main topic this fall, and one student stayed up for 4 days in a row because she could, just to see what it was like. And it wreaked havoc with her classes. She learned a valuable lesson that she can't do what her roommates can do, that she needs sleep. So there's those daily living skills, learning how to do laundry, decisions about what to do when, and really handling all the competing temptations that are there when you're living in a world with all young people. So for students to be able to independently stay on top of their work, they instantly need, if they haven't developed them in high school, they instantly need a new set of time management and study skills that no one has prepared them for. And they're needed the day you unpack them and move them into their dorm room. They're needed the next day. Things can be even more complicated if a student was used to getting accommodations and services in high school. And some of you may have questions about these differences. But what many people don't know is that the laws that govern college are very different than the laws that govern high school in terms of what colleges must provide. In high school, the laws are designed, I know it's not perfect, and I know that there are still many gaps in how we serve high school students with LD and ADD, but at the college level, the laws are only there to provide reasonable accommodations for students and not one-on-one services to help them overcome their disabilities. So what might that be? I think of instructional accommodations are similar to the ramps that are in buildings to help people in wheelchairs get in the buildings. These are instructional ramps that just provide access to the curriculum, things like audio versions of books instead of printed books, notes if a person has trouble taking notes, and extended time on tests. So those accommodations are all that colleges are mandated to do. Many colleges, like the one I work at, have always done more than the law required, but many do not. And they will, although there may be individual and group services available, they may be in different offices, and they may not all be in the disability office. And as this slide is pointing out, the way the laws are designed is suddenly, overnight, the young person has to be in the driver's seat for accessing their accommodations and using resources. And the parents who have played that important role for all those years are really not in the driver's seat in the college world. It's really mandated that the student disclose, and then the student has to learn how to manage the accommodations. The point number 2 on this slide is just reinforcing that there are no laws mandating IEPs or 504 plans in colleges. As I said before, only reasonable accommodations. IEPs and 504 plans mandate individualized instruction or changes in regular education. The third point here is sometimes shocking for students to learn, and maybe even for parents, is that the way the laws are written, the college, the professor, and the department and the programs have the right to define their teaching methods and their testing and grading procedures. So let me give an example. I've met many students who have never been downgraded for a spelling error, and that was part of their IEP that their regular teachers had to honor. At the college level, their assumption is I can call up their professors and not have them downgraded for their spelling errors. That's really not something that can be mandated. We can discuss that with professors, but again, a department can say, for example, the foreign language department can say that spelling the word is necessary. So there's less flexibility than there was in high school. So I would not be talking to you if I didn't believe there is much, much, much we can do to help students be better prepared and have this transition be less challenging. I meet students every day who come in more prepared than their peers, with some even more prepared than their peers without disabilities. And it's because they and their families and their schools have done some very deliberate planning in high school. I think a top issue is having kids be able to understand the differences between high school and college, not by telling them, but by having them experience them as early as possible. Visiting colleges, you can visit classes, having panels of students from high schools who have gone off to college, those diagnosed and those without, come back and talk to high school sophomores, juniors, and seniors and freshmen about what the differences were. It's really, really critical, point number 2, that sometime before the young person comes to college, if possible, they can come to understand their differences and accept them. Because as maybe many of you have already experienced, is you can't make them accept their difference when they're no longer living under your roof, and you probably can't make them accept it even while they are living under their roof. They have to go through their own acceptance process. They need practice being able to make decisions for themselves, wake up, sleep, study time, long-term assignments, and they can be helped tremendously if they learn to use resources to help them reach their goals and their dreams while they're in high school. I'm going to stop there. I think there's one more slide with some resources that I have provided. Some are books on transition, and some are books about college. Some are books about coaching, which is a unique intervention that I think really can help young people become independent. And then some websites that you can go to that will have lots of information on transition to college. So I'm going to stop there. And
That's great. Thank you so much. To me, this is an endlessly fascinating topic. As I told Dr. Maitland before we started, I have a daughter who's a junior in college, and we have lived many of the topics that you're discussing. So I think this is a subject that we all need to spend more time on. We sort of focus on getting our kids through elementary school and high school, but then before you know it, there they are in college. In terms of organizing the time we have left, you and I had talked about this. I think maybe we'll start first with preparing skills what should parents focus on during the high school years. You talked sort of globally about some of them, but any specific skills or suggestions? There are a number of people on the webinar who are asking for a bit of a timeline in terms of focusing on skills for preparation for college, and any advice that you have on how they can make that transition from helping their child to helping their child help themselves.
Yes, and let me just say that the title of the book we wrote, that Dr. Quinn and I wrote for parents, called Ready for Takeoff, came from the metaphor that a student gave me about having his mom be the pilot of his life. And I do think at younger ages, middle school, elementary school, and maybe even freshman, sophomore year, parents are more in the pilot role. But somehow over time they have to co-pilot and teach and then actually lead the cockpit. In terms of skills, and I think it's hard to give like a generalized timeline. What Dr. Quinn and I thought was really important was to provide families with a college readiness checklist, which we put in both books, that helps people look at their individual young person to see what they need. But some of the areas of skills that we've really defined are really critical to success in college. And these skills have come from our own work teams as well as research. Well, I'm going to just tell you the categories, and we'll think about these, like self-advocacy and communication skills. We can't stress enough how important it is to slowly over time have your young person learn how to introduce themselves to people, hold conversations, know what their strengths and weaknesses are, be able to know when they don't understand something and actually ask for help. Sometimes that might mean that the parent would go with the student to a meeting with a teacher to help and role play with the young person before the meeting how to ask for help. Another whole host of skills are self-management skills. Being able to actually know what you want to have happen in a day or in a week or in a month or in a semester and set goals, and then think through a plan to reach those goals, and being able to persist at reaching those goals, and think through and evaluate whether the plan is working. as Susan and I were talking about, so many young people with ADHD and LD also have extreme emotional issues. They may have coexisting anxiety or depression or other issues. So being able to be aware of their emotions and be able to know how to manage them productively. So those would be what we think of as the self-advocacy communication category. Then there are some really practical daily living skills. These may sound silly, but I hear them cause great stress for young people. Washing and caring for clothes. Recently, I had a young man who's a freshman in here almost in tears because he can't figure out how to fit that in his life because he's so stressed at college. And what he said to me is, I wish somebody would have helped me learn how to wash my clothes before I came. Now, honestly speaking, if his mom hadn't tried to make him do it, he might have resisted. But even if somebody resists, I think really slowly having your young person take ownership for learning how to do that with you and stopping at a certain point, maybe senior year, saying, I'm not going to wash your clothes because I want you to learn how to practice doing that and fitting it in your life. Taking medications, knowing what medications a person needs and taking them on their own with no reminders. Learning how to make appointments with doctors and order refills are some of the daily living skills that I see students really struggle with. Preparing meals and being able to know when they need to exercise, learning how to manage money, and certainly organizing their room and their possessions. I'm sure many of you have had to purchase more than one iPhone.
How did you know?
I hope, but I do have a young woman that part of my coaching with her is helping her not lose her purse. She has lost her purse so many times on campus, and her parents have set limits. So let me just stop and see, Susan, if I'm...
Well, let me just add one more to this list that you just named, which I think is one that many people have asked about here and one that's certainly come up in my family life. How do you help your child wake up on time? One person's actually posted that they have tried every alarm clock, including the ones that shake the bed and are high decibel, and her daughter is not able to wake up, and she's really concerned about the transition to college.
It is concerning, and I think, Susan, you and I talked about so many young people with ADHD have sleep issues and may have coexisting sleep disorders. So it's really profound, and it's an issue. Let's think about when we use this as an example in the book Ready for Takeoff because it was so common. I would wonder if a parent could take a coaching role with their young person and actually lead a discussion to say, this is a problem that we have to work on before you go off to college because I won't be there to wake you. Let's come up with a plan. The other thing that we talk about in the book Ready for Takeoff is that at some point the parent may have to decide to go cold turkey, we call it, where you actually say, if you don't wake up, I'm not going to bail you out. That sounds harsh and scary, and it may not work for everybody who has a sleep disorder, but many of the young people I see tell me that they never really tried hard to learn to wake up because they always knew that at some point a parent would come in and whisk them off to school, so they never faced a consequence. I would ask you to think about, are you giving natural consequences? Like, really, if there is no bus. I've had parents in high school let kids have to find their own way with a taxi. Those kinds of natural consequences can help. There are some crazy alarm clocks. I know your person mentioned the one that vibrates the bed. There is one, it's on wheels. It's called Clocky, C-L-O-C-K-Y, and a lot of my students who cannot wake up have awakened to that one. It rolls off the nightstand, rolls all around the room in random places, and you have to get up out of bed. If you're trying everything and your team is working with you on a plan of action and you're not getting anywhere, maybe a sleep study is needed because this may be really a coexisting sleep disorder that would be helpful to get to the bottom of before the young person comes to college.
Yeah, I think all of us, this is someone who posted, we have two clockies, lots of LOL. So here's someone else who posted, we have the tacky clock and it works. So there's lots of people chiming in on this waking up question.
Excuse me, what was that one called? The tacky?
Tacky? She said T-A-C-K-Y on the tacky clock.
We all want to know about that one if it works.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, well, let's, unless you have any last words on this preparing for independence, I mean, I think the two ones that I know that we've struggled with, the financial management, money management, and taking medication, I think the decision to take medication oftentimes, at least in my experience, when kids turn around 16, 17, 18, they start to say, well, I'm not sure I want to be different, or I don't want to take this, and when they go to college, of course, they take it if they want to. Do you have any thoughts on medication?
Yes, I guess I do think that it's very common for young people who are on medicine to stop it at college, partially because they don't want to be different, but partially because they haven't come to their own acceptance that they really do have a different brain and they really do maybe need it. I have had many students say, I think my mother made more of this. I don't think it's real. And then they have to go through their own acceptance process. Some of the wisest parents that have taught me when I worked with their high school students have actually allowed their young person through during high school to meet with the doctor prescribing the medicine, and they actually got out of the picture. The parent removed themselves and let the young person and the doctor kind of come to some plan for a trial off medicine. And to have an agreement that the young person would go back and share the observations with the doctor and come to some decision. Again, not all young people are that cooperative. Some are going to resist. But I do think that essentially for the young people I meet, like if they don't believe they have ADHD and they need medication, as soon as they're in this setting where there's nobody kind of structuring them, they do their own experimentation off medicine. So I would think involving your young person, if they're not involved as actively as you are in their meetings with their doctor, they need to be. If they have questions and they doubt it, they need to be asking their doctor. Now, assuming they do believe, but they can't remember their medicine, right? That can be a huge issue. Again, if you take a coaching role, you can actually collaborate with your young person and say, let's make a goal for the rest of the school year. I would like to reduce my involvement and help you learn how to manage your medicine. Let's brainstorm what would work. Most of the college students I meet, they're so blessed to be alive at a time where there's all this technology that will give reminders, right? iPhones, Android phones, Google Calendar will text you. When you have short-term memory problems and you're not on your medicine, you can't remember. But with all the tools that are out, if a young person is willing to program reminders. So I'm thinking, again, if parents have cooperative relationships with their young person, they can actually sit down and say, like, over the next 4 years or over the next 3 years or the next 3 months, because you may have a senior, how can I hand the reins to you in the cockpit with medication, and how can you slowly take it over? And I'm not going to abandon you, but let's see if we can make plans, try them a week, a month at a time, and see if you can learn how to be more independent.
I think these are great suggestions. To me, I have to say that in our case, my daughter's doctor initiated the idea that, I should leave the room when she was in high school, and he would talk to her. And, of course, he was right. And, I think that, but it isn't obvious to those of us who have been used to trying to manage the situation. So I think there's a great suggestion on managing the medicine. If we could turn now to getting ready to apply to colleges, we have a series of questions from people on the webinar about the kind of college you look for. Is there a benefit to small or large? How do you select college that's going to be friendly to an ADHD, LD student? Should you reveal in your application process that you do need special services? So any thoughts that you might have on the application process for students with ADD, ADHD, LD?
Well, that's a great set of questions. I think I personally don't think that it's simple to say that there's one type of college that fits all people, but we want to back up and say at the end of high school, you have to assess, is your young person really ready to go live away from home? And you maybe have to be thinking that throughout the 4 years, right, and be talking openly with them about what your criteria would be for allowing them to go live at a 4-year college. And I don't know if that's revolutionary for many of you, or some of you are already thinking that way, but certainly college is very expensive, right? And it's a huge investment. And for them, it's critical that when they go away, they are going to be more likely to be successful. And I have met many families who have not said it's a given. For me to be able to invest in that, I need to see these behaviors. And there are lots of options, right? There could be community colleges where you're living at home and you're taking classes on campus. That's going to be more structured like a high school. And most community colleges in our country are now having agreement with 4-year colleges, where at the end of the 2-year period, people can transfer and their credits go with them. I should just highlight, though, that that's not a magic bullet, because actually the research on transition to 4-year colleges from community colleges showing us that that group, whether they have disabilities or not, has great difficulty transitioning. So we wouldn't want to make it sound like that's the magic bullet. It will have its own unique challenges 2 years down the road. But I have worked with many families and young people who have realized that they are not ready to go live away from home. And it's overwhelming to them, and they do want to start off at a community college. But if you're at the point of saying, yep, we do want 4-year experiences, there are some resources, and I didn't list them on that handout, that might help you make some decisions. There are 2 huge guides that are published. Let me see if I can say them clearly and spell them. There's one guide called the it's the letter K and the letter W, Guide to Colleges for Students with LD and ADHD. I believe it's published by the Princeton Review. And there's another guide called the Peterson's, Petersons, Guide for Colleges for Students with LD and ADHD. And those tools are very helpful for families when they're in the search process. There is a book listed on my reference list about applying to college for students with LD and ADD that really helps narrow the process down quite well. But I think in looking at a college, families have to think about, can my young person be far away from home? They may want to be far away from home, but you may not have the resources, or you may feel they're not ready. This resource guide will list a lot of private and public colleges and tell you what kind of services they have. And in picking, there are colleges that have comprehensive programs, which means they have accommodations, which the law requires, but they will have an office where students, they may have a staff of 3 to 5 people who are available to meet individually with students once or twice a week. I don't think, there are some colleges that are, there's one college I can think of that is very specific to LD and ADHD. It's a very small 2-year college called Landmark College, where the class size is very small, and the teachers in the classes and the professors are specialists in LD and ADD. These guides will tell you there are some other colleges in the country that specialize more in LD and ADD, but they will also provide information on the resources and general colleges in your state or in the areas where you're looking. The search process, I think, has to consider, and we want the young person to realize that it's not just the basketball team of the college or the football team, but it's the resources available and how much support will be available to them. In picking those colleges and then in the process of applying, one of the hardest questions I think people grapple with is, should my young person disclose their disability? What many people don't realize is that colleges are allowed to have a special admissions process for individuals with disabilities, but not all of them choose to have that. So if your young person made a list of 10 colleges they want to apply to, you and your young person could go to the websites of those colleges and look at their admissions website to see if there are any special provisions for students with disabilities. If it's not obvious on the website, you certainly can call. And let me give an example. The college I work at, UNC, does list and invite people to disclose their disability. I would have to say in today's world, disclosing a disability should not prevent a person from being accepted to a college. Again, with the laws that require equal access, I would hope that doesn't exist. In our situation, we encourage people to disclose for a couple of reasons. If their record isn't competitive, let's say their grades in math or foreign language were awful, or they had a terrible freshman or sophomore year because they weren't willing to get help or they weren't on medication. If they have a record that isn't competitive, disclosure can be insurance. It can actually explain to the admissions committee why their record is not competitive. If their SAT scores are low because they didn't get extended time, or they don't test well, or they have a math disability and their math scores are low, all of those could be explained by disclosing in an essay, but also at the same time talking about how much the young person has learned, what their strengths are, and how they plan to use resources at the college level. So that disclosure process could actually get an admissions committee to think twice about a candidate that may not be competitive. So those are some ideas on like narrowing your list, deciding where to apply, researching, and then once a person has been accepted at a number of colleges, and I think, Susan, you can speak to this, I think that's when the real work begins, and it can actually begin before that. It could begin in sophomore and junior year. If your sights are set on a specific college, during those spring breaks, making trips to those colleges, meeting the staff in the support services, getting a feel for how the staff culture is in terms of LD and ADD, actually attending classes, asking to speak with advisors. The more that a person can research a college and actually get firsthand knowledge of what's going to be available, that will help make the decision better. I guess I would say that I'm going to stop there. Because I know.
I'll just chime in and say one thing. When my daughter started her freshman year, we learned the summer beforehand that there was a special course, freshman year course for students with ADD and LD, and she signed up for it. It was one of her 4 courses. It was great for her.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
Let me say, many colleges do have summer, they're called summer bridge, BRIDGE, summer bridge experiences. Those programs have historically been created for minority and first-generation students, and they allow students to come to campus for summer school before they are enrolled as freshmen, and they get them acclimated and get them connected to the resources. Many times, although those programs may not have been designed specifically for LD and ADD, families can ask to have their young person apply to that college because LD and ADD is a minority that's at risk, right, for college attendance. Some colleges do have special transition programs for LD and ADD. And if there is a college your young person wants to go to and there is no special program, you can create your own. If your young person is willing and you can afford it, they could go to summer school the summer before and actually get registered with the disability office, get the lay of the land before the whole campus gets crowded with everyone. And let me just mention how important it is to proactively register for accommodations. I think in the college search process, one of the pieces of information people should be looking at is what does it take to get accommodations at that college? What kind of documentation is needed? Once you're accepted, it's critical to immediately have your young person get on the phone with your help and find out, or go to the website and find out what kind of documentation is going to be needed to get accommodations and get registered before classes start.
Right, and I will chime in on that there was a very formal process at the school where my daughter goes that required a significant amount of paperwork. Quite a significant letter from someone who'd evaluated her, copies of previous evaluations. It wasn't a small process. It did result in her access to tremendous resources at the Disability Center, but definitely, to underscore what you're saying, making time on the schedule and thinking about applying for accommodations disability at college is something that you need to think about.
Well, and here's why. Sometimes people assume that because a young person got accommodations quite easily in high school, that it's going to just be okay to go up to the professor and say, I get extended time. Professors, again, are guided by this law, and they're going to say, have you registered with the disability office? Many young people with ADHD who are very bright have never had formal accommodations because people maybe have always informally accommodated them. That's unlikely to happen at most large four-year institutions in the country, those kind of informal accommodations. So the worst thing that could happen is right before an exam for a young person to realize they don't qualify because they didn't register. So that, and I think at the same time finding out what other resources are there beyond the disability office. At my college, my program doesn't manage accommodations. We're available to coach and work one-on-one with students. You don't have to register to work with us. So at most colleges, there may be learning centers and writing centers and counseling centers. And medication may be able to be prescribed by doctors at Student Health. All of those resources should be investigated before picking the college and certainly before starting classes.
Yeah, that sounds really important. I know I thought about trying to find a coach for my daughter in the town where she goes to college. In the end, that didn't work out, and she's used the facilities of the college. But I do know from other readers of Attitude that people have done that. Found a coach in the town where their child was going to college. This would be a
good time, Susan, for me to mention the EDGE Foundation, which is listed on the reference list. Finding certified and trained coaches who are really trained in coaching and specialize in ADD may be hard, but there are some organizations. The EDGE Foundation is actually an organization, a nonprofit, that's committed to providing coaching to high school and college students so that they can be successful in college, and they have Skype or FaceTime or virtual coaching, and they may have coaches in the community. They also, if finances are an issue, I believe they have some potential for scholarships. So that is one way that people, if the university doesn't provide coaches like ours does, that's a way to actually find someone. And even now in high school, if your young person is open and ready and willing to work with a coach, or you realize you can't be the coach anymore, you can look for coaches in your community or even see if a virtual coach through EDGE might work.
Okay, that sounds like a really good idea. People are talking about exactly sort of more help in terms of preparing getting their child to understand what they need to do to get ready to go to college, and they're wondering if there's a book that they might be able to read or have their child read to help them. Or you mentioned a checklist that sounded intriguing. And a college preparation checklist. That might be something that we should put up on the web with your slides for people who come back after the webinar is over. Might be helpful.
The reason that Dr. Quinn and I wrote the books we wrote is that when we were looking for resources to give our students, we couldn't find easy manuals to give people. So this is not meant to be self-serving. Right. Certainly the book On Your Own that we wrote for teens, we have in that book, it's written to teens, and it explains the differences between high school and college. It also has a college readiness checklist in there, and then the back part is a resource. Once the person identifies what skills they need to work on, it gives them a plan for setting goals, and it has a section of resources to give a young person ideas. We've gotten feedback that there have been schools in the country where the resource teachers have held college readiness classes using the book, which makes us feel very happy.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's terrific.
But I do think there's a paucity. Now, some of the websites I've mentioned have some great materials for teens. Heath and specifically, Heath connects to a lot of good resources that have programs that are designed to help college students get ready for self-advocating and for managing their time. So if you play with those resources that I've listed, they will lead you to some online resources.
That's great. Just back for a second to the college application process, some specific questions about whether you advise during the admissions process or tours talking to during the interview about asking about disability services. I have to say that I don't, but that's just my bias. I believe there's still such a prejudice against it.
I'm afraid there might. I would say that I think it would be really critical during an interview at a college to go visit the office that is the office serving students with disabilities. That office isn't going to have any bearing on an admissions decision in most colleges. In most colleges, there is an admissions committee, and you can actually set up that meeting and ask the disability office to make sure your young person remains confidential, that you don't want that in the admissions process. I guess from my vantage point, I've met other students who went to other colleges and they did not disclose, and they may have discovered that the climate wasn't matched to having students with disabilities. I think each person has to decide. Once you're accepted, you do have to disclose if you're going to get any help. There's no way around it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no question about it.
I hear what you're saying, Susan. You want to play it close to your vest.
I'm living in New York, where the world's very competitive, and the idea of revealing something like that would be very scary in the application process, but I'm sure there are situations where it absolutely makes sense. Can we talk a little bit about your advice for students while they're in college in terms of time management? There are a number of people asking, are there techniques, are there apps? When you work with college students, what's your advice to them in terms of managing what, as you explained so clearly, is a very different sort of time flow of work than what they've experienced in high school?
Again, the Learning Center's website, if you all can go to that website, it's called learningcenter.unc.edu, and go under Student Resources. We have some handouts there that we use with students, and we also have some animations that we created, and there's one on time management. And I would say, in general, helping students really get a visual for what their life looks like is frequently a first step with young people. So we have something that a lot of colleges have. It's a master calendar that's broken down hourly or half hourly. And at first we ask them if they're willing. Some don't even want to look at that calendar. It freaks them out. But if they're willing to actually, let's get a look at where do you have open pockets of time? And how much time do you have in a day? Because they've never really had to think that way. Many of them will tell me that, high school, 7:30 to 3, sports, dinner, homework. They've really never even had to think about managing pockets of time. So first of all, becoming aware that you do have these pockets of time, and then being able to, on a regular basis, we have a calendar on our website that's called the Semester at a Glance. I think at the college level, one of the most critical things that a young person has to do is not just know the daily work that's due, but know when big assignments are or big deadlines are. And we encourage students to, in the first week of class, to print out all their syllabi from their website. And I'm sure many of your teens are already familiar with with high school classes that are taught through websites. If not, that's a big adjustment, because in the college setting, professors are not reminding typically. They're expecting somebody to go to the website, look at the syllabus. So we encourage students to print that out, and in the first 2 weeks to actually, on this big calendar, the Semester at a Glance, which gives the whole semester on one page, to put down all their tests, papers, big things, and maybe even big social things if they're in fraternities and sororities, so that they can actually begin to see the bad weeks where there's 5 papers due and 3 tests and there's a football game. That gives them the big picture. And then on a regular basis, we encourage them to make a weekly task list. And on that weekly task list, they would put the reading assignments that are due that week, any graded homework, which is very rare at the college I work at. Very little graded homework is handed in. More often it's reading assignments. And then we encourage them to look ahead 2 weeks or so to see on that big calendar, are there any papers coming up, any big tests that they need to start chipping away, doing small pieces. So we frequently in our coaching relationships are trying to help people be deliberate and more clear. Let me just say, I meet many students who abhor calendars, paper calendars, and there are so many great technological options. If you are not familiar with Google Calendar, which syncs with Android phones, that has been and there's an iCalendar that syncs with iPads and iDevices. Those tools are incredible at helping young people with ADHD, and probably all young people, but especially those with ADHD, because you can put a schedule online and send yourself email or text reminders about things. You can have those reminders happen a week before a paper is due, an hour before you have an appointment to go get your medication. They will prompt, and there are lots of, we are actually this summer going to spend time looking at all the apps that are out there. I'm going to switch gears and say that some of the tools that we need to talk to students about for time management have to do with blocking technology. I'm sure many of you, your young people, are glued to their phones because that's how they communicate with one another through social media. And those distractions can wreak havoc, of course, with high schoolers, but also with college students where they sit down to do work and they're on Facebook. So there are a lot of software programs that students have been willing to put on their laptops or on their devices that will block certain sites for a period of time. It's sort of like you might have blocked them from having access to things because you would make them give you their phone. Well, instead they learn to do that with this software that will stop them from surfing the web, and they can set it to free certain websites several hours after they've done their homework. So a lot of what we do is personalized, although we do have some strategies in mind. We really, in our coaching relationship, ask the young person to think about what tools they might use. And I still do meet people who write on their hand to remember things, and we say, great, if it works for you. Post-it notes, because they don't want to see the whole week's list. They only want to see one day at a time. But, the bottom line is teaching those higher-level planning skills. That's the critical tool for college. And if all that planning and all that knowledge is in the minds of the moms and the dads who are doing all the planning, that's what has to shift during high school. Little by little, they have to take on figuring out how they're going to design their day and how they're going to make things happen.
People are asking whether you can give the name of that blocking software or a blocking software.
If you go to our website, we have several of them listed. They're listed once you're on our website, there's some tabs at the top that say Student Resources. If you click on those, it's called Productivity Tools.
Okay. Again, folks, the website is learningcenter.unc.edu. It sounds like it's got some great resources on it. I said we're sort of running out of time here. I could go on for another hour happily. Let me turn to a difficult topic that a number of people are raising. Either a child who is not doing well, failing 3 courses freshman year, at what point do they start over, come home, or a child who has dropped out, failed out, just didn't succeed during freshman year and is home now and sort of spending their time on the computer. How do you handle that? It may well have been a case of a kid who just wasn't ready for college. As we've heard so many times on our webinars that we should think of our kids as being 3 years chronologically younger, emotionally younger than their chronological age. But what do parents do when they do see their child really floundering freshman year, or they've actually come home because it hasn't worked out?
Well, that is hard. Unfortunately, I've been a witness to that experience in my day job where students had to withdraw, or they withdrew, came back, and withdrew again. Let me just frame it. For those of you who are experiencing this, I know this is going to sound crazy, but failure could actually be a blessing in disguise. I know that it's painful to watch, but I have met many students who had to hit that brick wall here to realize that they needed more help, or they needed to do things differently, or they had a bigger emotional issue that they didn't want to acknowledge and they needed therapy. So quite honestly, if processed well, that could be the beginning of a young person really understanding what they need and being more committed, and maybe deciding they're in the wrong place. I have met a young man, and he stands out in my mind. His whole family came here. He so wanted to come here and be successful. He just could not do it. Eventually, he realized sitting in a classroom all day long with his hyperactivity doing passive learning, it just didn't work for him. Mm-hmm. He eventually became an airline pilot.
Wow.
And he eventually, as his brain matured, he is now coming back 10 years later to finish his degree. So sometimes, I would think that population, and I meet them in my private practice, it's very painful and very hard. And I think families frequently need a third party with a young adult who's that much older, right? To help them set goals and move forward. And that's where, again, maybe having a coach or a therapist or trying the EDGE coaches, they will also work with young people to really help them figure out what is their passion, what are their talents, maybe college isn't for them, maybe that college wasn't for them, and really what did they learn? What caused the failure? Because unfortunately, sometimes what causes the failure is not just, it's the ADD causing other problems, right? Drug and alcohol problems, not attending class, not being honest with yourself or your parents about what you're doing. So I do think having somebody who's a third party to help them really honestly look at what did they learn and what do they need to do differently to be successful, and frequently to tie them back into what is a dream that they do have. Right now I have someone in my private practice, his dream now is to be a chef. And he's giving up college, and his mom cannot talk with him about this anymore because he shuts down with her. And I do think it's much harder, and that's a population that we are forgetting, the people who did not succeed, who need lots of services, and there aren't any easily structured services out there.
Right, absolutely. That sounds like it's a really good advice. A last question, which is quite the opposite of what you were just talking about, but there are a number of people who are asking about how to help their child with ADHD pick the right major or the right internship or even think in terms of the right career. And I have to say we get those kinds of questions commonly at Attitude. What's the right job for ADDers? And I don't know. I'd love your point of view. My own point of view is there isn't an ADD job, but I'd love to hear what you think about picking college majors and picking sort of a path while you're in college.
Well, I do.
Question, I think.
It is a tough question, and I do think you're. I've gone to a workshop on Asperger's, and the person presented and said, when you meet one person with Asperger's, you meet one person with Asperger's, and I would say the same about ADD, right? Yes. I do think all colleges have a lot of resources, if your young person will use it, that are designed to help them with these issues. Not all have the same quality, but they do have career services frequently. They have advising, where and really there are people, and you want to encourage your young person to look on campus, who are the resource people to help them sort that out. I do think helping the young person really get in touch with what do they love, what are their passions, what are their natural talents and strengths. How does ADD impact them in certain learning situations? They have to really be aware. I had someone who was in the business school realizing that they could not sit still and do all that calculating.
Right.
But then switched to a marketing major because he's great on his feet, verbalizing, and he can actually create great marketing strategies. I do think it does start with knowing yourself, knowing your passion, knowing what your talents are, and trying things. I don't think there is one perfect internship. I think the point of internship would be to try out what your vision is of what you'd love to do, and then come back and say, is that really what I love to do?
Yeah, that's so interesting. My daughter's school has a January term, and they have lots of wonderful resources. So she's done some really interesting things. And what she discovered, in support of what you're saying, is that the January term projects that she loved involved being outdoors. So she did a marine biology one where she was, collecting samples in a kayak and freezing water, and she thought it was just great, So I think you're right. Just trying things out helps you more than anything else in terms of, knowing really what works for you and what doesn't.
And again, there are coaches I know who specialize helping people with career, but most coaches are to help people figure out their passions and their dreams, and then try it out.
Well, this has been so terrific. I mean, do you have any final words? We are out of time.
I think the important thing I want to say is, although this sounds serious and hard, I meet students every day who are successful here. And I talk to people all over the country. We see the graduation rates of college students with ADHD improving. We see transition programs beginning to be created. I think we have a lot to be hopeful about. And I think none of this happens by hoping it will happen, right? Mm-hmm. Hope is not a plan. So I would say whatever you've taken away from the phone call, you want to see if you can have a conversation with your young person to say, I want you to go to college, and I know you do too. Let's look at how we're living together and see how we can design things so you're in charge, because in a few years, few months, it's all going to be up to you, and I want to support you to learn how to be your best. So
that's a great advice. Dr. Maitland, thank you so much. With that, I'll sign off. Thanks again, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Maitland.
Thank you.
For more Attitude Podcast and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.